The modern Western civilization is an expression of what is called Darwinian modernity, aiming to transform the world into a utilitarian object that is instrumentalized for the benefit of the stronger. In this video, we're not going to talk about the Western civilization itself, but instead about its impact on Jews and Zionism, and how Nietzsche's thought influenced Zionist thinkers. Before we dive in, we need to differentiate between Judaism and Zionism. Jewish law states that a child of a Jewish mother is Jewish. So based on that, a Jew stays Jewish even if he's an atheist or has left the religion. Unlike Christianity and Islam, where faith in God is indispensable, in Judaism the definition is based on a blood relationship defined and conditioned by religious law. On the other hand, Zionism is completely different. To be a Zionist, you just need to believe in the Zionist ideology. You don't need to be a Jew. It doesn't matter whether you're a Jew, Muslim, Christian, or even an atheist. And even more, the Zionist movement was supported and raised by anti-Jewish groups. In the period between the 5th and the 15th century, the world was a Christian world and an Islamic world. It lacked centralization of power, meaning it was composed of small states and emirates. If we look closely at the Christian world, especially in Europe, we can notice that society at that time was divided into strata. There were nobles, including knights, their lords and kings. The clergy was subordinated to the church. The laborer included members of craft unions and everyone else. Now if we look at the Jews, we can see that they lived among others in a normal way. Yet if we delve a bit deeper, we find that the Jewish communities were largely autonomous. They provided services, collected taxes, regulated the lives of their members, and even settled disputes according to the halakha, or what is known as a Jewish law. These communities were, for all purposes, cities within cities, self-regulating political units that provided all basic municipal services to their members. Therefore, to some extent, Jewish communities were considered at that time as functional groups. This refers to human groups that are brought in from outside a certain society and assigned certain roles that the majority of society members can't or won't do, often roles related to special interests or security positions. As a side note, at that time, while the church strictly prohibited Christians from engaging in usury, Jewish people did engage in it. It's true that usury is also forbidden in Jewish law, but to clear it up, Jews apply the prohibition of usury only among themselves. A Jew is not allowed to lend money at interest to another Jew, but according to the Torah, it is permitted to lend money to non-Jews at interest. Here is the core of the matter. Since Christians couldn't engage in usury and Jews couldn't own land or join craft unions, they were left with professions that were looked down upon, such as lending money with interest and collecting taxes. As a result, an economic need arose. When kings or merchants needed loans, they didn't find anyone but the Jews. And then, the stereotype of Jewish greed took hold in the Middle Ages. The idea of collective Jewish return wasn't raised at a religious level because it referred to what is called dahikat hearts or hastening the end. But Western colonialism had another opinion. They saw that the only solution to expel Jews from Western communities was by deporting them, or in religious terms, by returning them to the Promised Land. The scheme of deporting Jews and resettling them in Palestine was the Zionist movement. It was seen as the only solution to solve the Jewish problem in Western civilization. In the eyes of Europe, Jewish people were seen as hypocritical, greedy characters with an insatiable appetite for money. It is clear from the facts that the Zionist movement was some sort of Western bigotry, an ideology that considered other nations as less valuable and saw non-Western peoples as fundamentally different genetically. In their view, civilization and race were one and the same. Upon closer examination of the Balfour Declaration, we find that Balfour himself considered the Jews to be a hostile group. He believed their existence led to misery and suffering, and that the loyalty to the state they lived in was weak compared to the loyalty to their religion. He also saw them as a ruthless people who shouldn't dwell among Europeans. There is no stability in this world, and if the world is in constant motion, then there are no absolutes. Everything is relative. If everything is relative, then there is no true meaning or morality. Morality is nothing but a collection of myths invented by humans because of their utility. They contain no inherent truth, as the world is in a state of perpetual becoming. In the 18th century, a movement known as the Enlightenment appeared. This movement focused on the importance of rationality and the ability of reason to uncover the dimensions of reality and control it. One of its most prominent concepts was the idea of escaping the complex world to the simple one, from an industrial polluted world to the one of simplicity and rural life, from the metaphysical unseen world to the world of nature and law. A clear example is when Newton discovered the laws of motion and gravity. The world came to be explained by natural laws rather than divine secrets. This idea greatly influenced the Jewish view of the concept of return, leading them to believe that the land recognized them and held goodness for them alone. In fact, this is a Darwinian concept reflected in the belief that survival is not for the morally best, but for the materially strongest. The Darwinian philosophy shaped the infrastructure of Western modernity, called Darwinian modernity. Therefore, the Zionist ideology is a translation of this Darwinian vision. We find that the Zionist movement didn't stop at the invasion of Palestine, not just through weapons, but also with the secular Darwinian ideological missiles. And from a Darwinian perspective, what happened in Palestine is considered permissible. What's more, Zionist thinkers were influenced by Nietzsche's ideas. In fact, their adoption of Darwin's concepts came through their reading of Nietzsche's writings. Upon reflection, we find that Zionist ideology grew up under the intellectual guidance of German nature philosophy, which glorified the spirit of the nation, held sacred rights, and emphasized the relationship between blood and the soil. One of the most prominent Zionist thinkers was Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement, who was nurtured at the hands of German civilization and traditions. Back to Nietzsche, in his definition of morals, he said that the good man is the strong man, the man who is able to grow and be the master of the world he lives in, without taking other lowly creatures into consideration. The strongest man doesn't care about conventional compassion for the weak. That's the morality of slaves. This is precisely what shaped the Jewish view, that they are not just an average nation, but a super nation, a people who see themselves as superior to other peoples. As we saw, Zionist thought grew on non-Jewish ground. It was shaped by Zionist thinkers who were blatantly against Jewish people in the 19th century. These thinkers had a deep antipathy toward Jews, and this later evolved and influenced certain Jewish leaders who ironically also harbored hatred toward the Jewish people. But the pivotal moment in the crystallization of this ideology came in the 17th century by Western colonial power who were preaching the idea of Jews returning to the land, and it didn't appear from Jews, but from some Protestant Christians, those who believed in the doctrine of restoration and in the return of Christ at the end of the time. They believed he would rule the world for 1,000 years with the priests, fill the world with justice, and that this wouldn't happen except with the return of the Jewish people to the land in Palestine. This also brings us to another point, the Western perception that Nazi Germany would later learn from. In February 20, 1939, Nazi documents circulated calling for the dissolution of Jewish organizations that advocate for Jewish existence in Germany. Here came an important question. Was there a relation between the displacement of the Jews and the extermination operations the Nazis carried out? In reality, the expulsion operation was never against the extermination idea, because both operations contributed to a single common goal, to rid Europe of the Jews, either through relocation or elimination. Since the Balfour Declaration aimed at ridding Europe of Jews, the Nazi regime also embraced this idea, seeking to relocate them to Poland, but the plan failed. We can say that modern Western civilization became a melting pot of ideas that made the extermination camps seem tragically normal and rational in a way to get rid of Jews. In the end, do you think that people's identity is based on ethnicity, religion, or something else? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.